we're going to look at a couple of things. This is from the Gospel according to Mark, where a father says about his son, he says, he's bringing a son that's possessed with a demon to Jesus. And one of the things he says to Jesus is, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Well, how can that be? How can you believe and have unbelief? Well, if you've never been there, you will get there, where you know you believe, and yet your faith feels so weak in facing the issues. And how do you strengthen that faith? And that's one of the things we're going to learn in this. Now, if you will look in the bulletin, I reprinted an article from an earlier event about the Syrophoenician woman when Jesus went up to Sidon. And here is a mother, and her daughter is possessed of a demon. And this Canaanite woman comes to Jesus and says, I need your help with my daughter. And Jesus tells her, well, I'm not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. She didn't come for this. She didn't want to hear about all of that. She said, Lord, help me. How that must have struck the heart of Jesus. And with his disciples looking on, Jesus said, well, it's not fit to take the children's bread and give it to dogs. And that mother, she said, yes, Lord. She wasn't going to argue with him. Yes, but the children feed from the crumbs that fall from the children's table. I mean, the dogs feed from the crumbs that fall from the children's table. And Jesus said, great is thy faith. Be it to thee according as thou wilt. And her daughter was healed from that hour. And you read that and you think, how could Jesus say something like this to this mother pleading for help? And there's all kind of explanations about that. The one that sticks to me, that seems to be the most reasonable explanation, he's showing his disciples this woman's faith. This is how his disciples would have treated that woman, just like a dog, have nothing to do with her. And he's treating her the way those disciples would have treated her, because he wanted to show those disciples with him. He knew she had that faith, and he wanted to show them that faith. And now we're going to look at an instance where there's a lack of faith. It's similar. A parent coming with a demon-possessed child. But this time, instead of a mother and a daughter, it's a father and a son. Look at this. Look at this next slide up there. Here's an illustration of it. Christine found an old book. I mean, it's a great big old book. It's falling to pieces. And she sent it to me. It's printed back in the late 1800s. And I look at the book, and I think it said over 500 illustrations by the old masters. The book is about the life of Christ. It's called From the Manger to the Crown. I think that's the name of the book. But it's all about the life of Christ, and it's got these woodcut illustrations in it. And this is the illustration that has to do with the text today. You see Jesus there and the Father holding the Son that's obviously very disturbed and frightened. And you might look at you can look close, you might see one of those scribes there in the back. Of course, this is just a man's depiction of it. But I'm going to try to draw some of those illustrations out of that book and show them to you as we go through the story of Christ in the book of Mark. And that's where it comes from. Mark 9:24. Straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears. Think how this must have affected Jesus. With tears, this father says, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. All right, let's look at this story. Jesus had given his disciples the power to cast out demons. There's a lot about demons we do not understand. The Bible tells us about demon possession, about unclean spirits, about being possessed of devils, but it doesn't explain it. And because we don't see that today the way they see it, it's frightening to us. We don't really understand it all. And there's all kinds of talk about trying to explain this and everything, but whatever it was, whatever was going on, Jesus had given his disciples the power to cast out demons, and here they failed. They were not able to do that. And that's frightening. Now, he says, when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them and the scribes questioning with them. Jesus had been up on the Mount of Transfiguration. He had been with Moses and Elijah. He had heard his Father say, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him." What a spiritual high point that was in the life of Godhood become man, and to hear those reassuring words and coming down from that mountain, here's what he finds. It must have been such a letdown to come down from that mountain and see this lack of faith and this confusion. These scribes have his 9 disciples cornered. You see, Peter, James, and John went up on the mountain with him. But the 9 that are left, they have failed. And these scribes, they're disputing with him. That word that says they're questioning him, they're arguing with them. That's what that word is talking about. That's the way it's translated in some of the translations. They've got them now. They can't do this. And so the scribes are pounding them. And then Jesus shows up. And the thing changes when Jesus shows up. It says, and straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed and running to him, saluting him. Jesus is going to make the difference in this. He always does, doesn't he? Here comes Jesus now. And so he asked the scribes, why question you with them? What are you arguing with them about? Well, one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And look, wheneversoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth, and he gnasheth with his teeth, and pineth away. Pineth away. I mean, this son's losing his health. He's growing thin. It's sapping all his energy. He's in a pitiful situation. By a dumb spirit means when the spirit comes on him, the child can't express himself. He can't speak. And look, it teareth him. I mean, there's rips in his flesh that come about as a result of the Spirit coming upon him. And he foameth and gnashes with his teeth. It sounds horrible, doesn't it? We read different accounts of this. Mark goes on and tells us that oft time it cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. And then he says he's called a foul spirit. And the Lord says, thou dumb and deaf spirit. Not only could the young man not express himself and talk, he couldn't hear either when this would have come upon him. And Luke the physician talks about how it bruised him. He's falling down, he's getting hurt, and old Dr. Luke, he said, look at the bruises. You know, that's what a doctor would do. It is bruising him. And then in Matthew 17:15, Matthew records how the Father says he's a lunatic and sore vexed, a lunatic. Now, Luna, that has to do with the moon. The literal word is he's moonstruck. Moonstruck. And it goes with the idea that somehow the moon affects human behavior. Now, we can get into discussion about that, but that's not really the point here. It got to where any kind of erratic behavior, people would say they're moonstruck. It's because they're acting erratically. The commentators will often tell you, this sounds like epilepsy. In fact, some of the translations will say he's an epileptic. And I've known people that have had epilepsy, and I've seen it when it struck them, and they fall down, and they're biting with their teeth, and there's certain things you do to help that person get through that, and that may have been. Maybe the son did have epilepsy, but that was only the symptoms. The problem was a demon. And it's interesting that while people would have these physical symptoms of things, in the days of Christ, they never thought, well, now he might have a demon. They didn't think that. They knew he did. And they knew there was a difference between what the demon did to them and the demon itself. Well, maybe this demon gave this child epileptic fits. Maybe that's what it was. But it wasn't just because of a physical ailment. There's something spiritual going on here that is horrible and that is frightening with this father's son. Well, the father said, I spake to the disciples, they should cast him out, and they could not. That's why those scribes were onto those disciples. And it sounds like Jesus is frustrated now. Could you imagine? I would be. And certainly Jesus coming down from the Mount of Transfiguration, finding this mess waiting for him. And he answers, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him to me." Well, they should have had the faith to take care of this. He's going to explain to them why they couldn't do this in a little bit, but he's frustrated. But he can take care of it. You bring him to me. Well, they brought him to him. And when he saw him, hear that demon, he acted up. He knew he's in the presence of Jesus. That demon, straightway the spirit tear him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. And he asked his father, how long is it since this came upon him? Now we're going to learn something. We're going to learn something about demons that is very disturbing. Because we might think, why these people, demons, they must have sold their soul to the devil. They've done something wrong, but not necessarily. So it doesn't explain to us why some people were possessed and others were not. It says here, the father said, how long has this happened? He says, of a child. Now, that word is a word for a young child. This is an innocent child. And that demon possessed this innocent child and had evidently been with him for some time, since he was a little child. This has been happening to him. And oftentimes it cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. I tell you, you can hurt. You can hurt. Nothing will hurt you like seeing your children hurt. I'll tell you that. Here this father's had to deal with this afflicted child because of a spiritual demon that is causing this problem. And then the father said this, kind of thing we would say when we go to the doctor. Maybe you take your dog to the vet, the dog's not dumb, and you say to the vet, if you can help him, help him. And the idea, you don't always know if the doctor can't always help. The vet can't always help. And he comes to Jesus and says, if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help it. If you can help, help us. And that might seem an innocent thing to say, but it's not. There's doubt in the if. You remember that Syrophoenician woman? She never said if. She just said, Lord, help me. She knew he could if he would. Perhaps this father thought Jesus would if he could. If he could. Now, I want to compare the King James Version here to the New American Standard Bible. Okay? I want to make a comparison. Here's what it says in the King James Version. Mark 9, 22 through 23. If thou canst do anything, if you can, see the doubt there? If thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to them, if thou canst believe, all things are possible if you can believe. Jesus is making a statement in the King James Version. He says, if you can, Jesus said, well, if you can. And that may have been the way it worked. You see, the punctuation was not in the original manuscripts, but I think it's interesting how that the New American Standard Version turns this into a question, and it fits the context and the frustration Jesus is seeing here. New American Standard Bible, it's up on the screen. If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus says, if you can. If you can. What's this if business? Where's the faith? If you can. All things are possible to him who believes. And then this father. Straightway the father of the child cried and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. You ever struggle with faith? You believe, but you don't believe. You believe, but do you believe enough? Is your faith strong enough? And this father, he confesses both his faith and his doubts to the Lord, and he does it with tears. Now, Jesus shows us who God is. God is a God of compassion. If you ever go to God and you're struggling with your faith, I want you to know you're not the first one. God's already seen this. He was right here with us and saw that. And he'll understand. Take that to your Heavenly Father. Take it to Jesus. He knows. And so, Jesus saw the people came running together. Now, Jesus doesn't like to put on shows with his miracles, and the crowd's gathering, so he's going to take care of this. He doesn't want to put on a big show in front of a big crowd, but here people are running together, so Jesus, he just takes over. It says, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying to him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him and enter him no more. You hear the authority of that? Jesus knew he could take care of this. And that demon had no chance to he resisted those disciples. He can't resist Jesus. But look what he did. This sounds like an evil spirit, doesn't it? The spirit cried and rent him sore and came out of him. It's like he's going to do as much damage as he can on his way out. And he was as one dead, as much as many said he is dead. That the child, now he's ripped open and he's laying there like he's dead. But Jesus takes him by the hand and lifts him up and he arose. Was the child dead? Well, it says he was as dead. Kind of reminds me when Paul was stoned and left for dead, and we wonder, well, was Paul dead? Well, he could have been dead, but maybe he wasn't really dead. But regardless, there's a resurrection here. At least it appeared dead and came dead. There's going to be a greater resurrection to come. And maybe this is foreshadowing some kind of that resurrection we're going to read about later. But Jesus lifted him up and he arose. And you know, he's healed now. Those tears don't matter now. They're healed. The child is healed. And Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up and he rose. And then he comes into his house. His disciples ask him privately, why could not we drive him out? Why couldn't we do that? Well, the answer in Matthew is this. Mark doesn't give this part of the answer, but Matthew does. In Matthew's account of this, Jesus said it's because of your unbelief. See, this is a whole account about weak faith. It's because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed. You ever plant turnips? That's about the size of a mustard seed. Maybe you plant mustard, but it's just tiny, little bitty seed. And if you just had that little bitty, tiny bit of faith, why, you could say say to this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, it'll be removed. Nothing be impossible for you. Those disciples, when they were not in the presence of Jesus, had lost that little bit of faith. They didn't even have that much faith. It doesn't take a lot of faith, does it? That father had the faith of a mustard seed. Just a little bit. He knew he needed more. He had a little bit. Here's the answer he gives in the book of Mark. He said unto them, this kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. This kind? Well, that tells us something else about these demons that we don't really want to know. There's different kinds of demons. Evidently, some are worse than others. This kind. Wonder what those other kinds were. This kind cometh not out but by prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. And he's talking about faith. And here is his associating faith with prayer. And the old manuscript said included fasting. Prayer and fasting. We'll get to that in just a moment. You see, Romans 10:17 says, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. You want faith? Here's your source of faith right here. Here's your source of faith. There's evidence. There's reason to believe. We've got collaborative witnesses. This story itself, it's not just told by Mark. You can look at Matthew. You can look at Luke. At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. We have reasons to believe that are in this book, and by the knowledge of this thing, we have faith. But Jesus is talking about something else here, another aspect of faith, because he talks about a faith that comes by prayer and fasting. What's that? How's that different than the faith that cometh by hearing? Well, it's not necessarily different. Let me tell you, if all the faith you have is the faith that cometh by hearing, you have a weak faith. You want to grow that faith? You want to make that faith strong? Put it into practice. When you practice your faith, you strengthen your faith. There's a knowledge, there's an intellectual faith that comes when you are believing, but it needs to go into trust. And that comes through obeying. We believe, and then we trust. And faith grows stronger through prayer, through worship. Now, Romans 12:1, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Prove it. What's that mean? You put it to the test and you see that it is so. That's what it means to prove it. And so you're faithful. If you'll be faithful, your faith will grow. Make sure you go to worship, that you pray together, that you pray in your closet, that you sing these songs, you give as you've prospered. You take the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week. You commit yourself to Christ and you live the way Christ wants you to live, and faith grows and grows. You consider your spiritual health to be of greater importance than your physical health. Prayer and fasting. You put physical things secondary and spiritual things first. And that little faith that you have will grow and grow and grow. And that's the faith that we learn to have through this story. I believe helped now my unbelief. Another point to make before we leave. Why is Mark telling us these things? Because Jesus is the Christ. He's showing us Jesus is the Christ. You see, when 9 disciples of Christ failed, Jesus didn't. He never fails. He never did fail. And he never will fail. And we can put our trust in him. Trust and obey. Do you have faith? Do you? Oh yeah, I believe. I believe you do. Do you believe enough to trust him? Will you do what he said? You sit here and say, I have faith, but I don't want to do what he said. Really? Where's your faith? Jesus says, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Do you have faith? You believe? Will you be baptized? You do what he says. You'll have greater faith. And so the invitation is yours. put that faith into action. I will stand and sing.